The Green Arrow, the Robin Hood of DC with his green suit, fancy mustache, trick arrows, and oh my god, did he just murder that guy? On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss the pilot episode of Arrow. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows that are based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and this is our March Madness, where we are pitting two DC shows against each other, and we will determine which had the bigger impact. Will it be Smallville that we talked about 2 weeks ago, or the show that we're talking about today, Arrow? And joining me today are two co-hosts who hopefully will not fail this podcast. First, from the 80s flick flashback, it's Tim Williams.
My ability to keep you from harm will outweigh your comfort.
All right.
That was said in the episode, if you didn't know.
It was. And speaking of fancy mustaches, it's Justin Baker.
I just want you to know I did not take a yacht to get here.
What is it that Tommy says? A yacht suck?
Didn't I tell you yacht suck?
Did I tell you yacht suck? So, all right. So we are talking about the pilot episode of Arrow. Yes, we might end up talking about Arrow as a series, but our focus is just on the pilot episode, which aired on October 10th, 2012. So if you went back to our Smallville episode from a couple weeks ago, you will also find out that Smallville debuted in October. Great and wonderful October. Give us some great television shows. Here it was on the CW. If you want to hear about the path that led to Arrow, go back and listen to our one shot from last week where we get into all the details about the production, the creation of the show, why they decided to go away from the Smallville universe, which Smallville had just ended a little over a year prior to this. So, lots that we talked about a week ago. Go back and listen to that. But let's go ahead and jump straight into this with our comic book connection.
This is the comic book connection theme.
While Arrow creates its own identity, it still draws from Green Arrow's rich comic book history. Oliver Queen's origin as a castaway on Lian Yu echoes Green Arrow Year One by Andy Diggle. Yes, that's where the name comes from. And Jock, aka Mark Simpson, where a privileged billionaire is hardened by survival. The hooded vigilante aesthetic borrows heavily from Mike Grell's The Longbow Hunters, which introduced a darker, more brutal take on the character. The Queen family's legacy and dark secrets tie into themes from the Green Arrow runs by Dennis O'Neil and Jeff Lemire, reinforcing Oliver's struggle between privilege and justice. The pilot also introduces a version of Deathstroke's mask, teasing one of Green Arrow's deadliest comic book rivals. So, before we talk about the show itself, how familiar were either of you with the actual character of Green Arrow?
0 for me.
I remember the famous Speedy comic book.
Yeah, where you find out that he's a drug addict.
Mm-hmm.
And
he's slapping him on the cover.
Yeah, which of course this show kind of starts to tease about. So to both of you, Green Arrow was in fact just like DC's Robin Hood, or
Robin
or
Hood
if you knew Hawkeye, Hawkeye
Right,
from Marvel, he was just the DC version of Hawkeye.
Yeah, I talked about it on the one shot, but like a friend of mine recommended the show to me, and he was like, "Just watch the pilot. The pilot's awesome." And about halfway through the pilot, I was like, why do I feel like I'm watching Batman, but instead he's just with an arrow instead of dressing as a bat, but, so like I watched the first couple episodes and then I didn't really follow through with it. And then probably halfway through season 2, I decided to go back and watch from the beginning because I've been hearing, things about it again. And so that's when I got hooked. I got hooked a little bit later than when it first started. But, once I got past that, like once I could disconnect that feeling of, it just feels like a different version of Batman, I was able to kind of get more into the story and then into the character.
So did either of you know the character from because he was featured a lot in the Justice League animated series in the early 2000s. So did either of you recognize the character that way?
I do remember him from the Justice League cartoons.
Because you got to see him use a lot of his trick arrows. Obviously in animated, that works well. But yeah, so all right, so neither one of you. Justin, when did you first see the show? Did you watch it when it aired, or did you see it later like Tim?
I waited until when season 2 came out, I would watch season 1 on Netflix. And so I was always a season behind, and I just kind of binge watch it.
You refuse to watch it week to week like a television show should be watched.
Yeah.
Go against the current.
Right. That's kind of how it was, because I think I watched the first 2 seasons on demand. If not through Netflix, I watched it on the CW app or whatever, or watched it online.
Yeah, I want to say back then, the CW app was entirely free.
Yeah, it was. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't even think you even had to have a TV provider or anything. You could just watch it on their app.
Every commercial break was only CW shows that you didn't want to watch. Even Canadian and other, there were a couple of shows that I was like, this didn't even air in the United States, but it was on the app. So they were just trying to get you to watch other shows on the app. Even some shows that only lasted 2 seasons, they would still promote those pretty heavy. So
yeah, I of course I did watch it as it aired. I remember the lead up to it. I remember the posters. Of course, a lot of them going, hey, check out Stephen Amell's physique. That was a lot of what the posters would lead to, or in the commercials teasing it would show him doing the salmon ladder. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into cast since we're talking about Stephen Amell here. So we got Stephen Amell playing Oliver Queen, who I got to give the man credit. He did some intense training.
Absolutely.
And he wanted to do it as much himself as possible. So I did read he did a lot of his own stunts.
Yep.
And it is really him doing the salmon ladder.
Yeah. I remember reading that was something he would not allow them to get a stuntman to do that. He wanted people to know that was him and that he could do it. So yeah.
Yeah. Which he later actually, as part of, I want to say it was Red Nose Day.
Yes,
he actually did
Yep.
the American Ninja Warrior course.
I remember that.
And which, of course, is where a lot of people know the salmon ladder from. So yeah, I mean, I got to give Stephen Amell credit for that. Which, of course, he would later adapt to kind of a semi-pro wrestling, which would lead to his next series that he would do after this called Heels. So, yeah. So, what did y'all think of Stephen Amell as Arrow, aka Oliver Queen? Because the thing with a superhero show is always, can they play both personas? So in just this first episode, how well do you think Stephen Amell came across being able to play the rich kid as well as playing the vigilante?
I think he did well. I mean, I thought he was able to handle both pretty well.
Yeah, I'd say maybe I kind of lean more he's better vigilante than Oliver Queen, but you also don't see him play Oliver Queen,
as
Playboy
much,
as much.
And I think this is a character thing, not a performance thing. I think Oliver is still realizing how he has to separate those two characters, because there is a lot that he does as Oliver Queen that you would later go, yeah, you probably shouldn't have done that if you want to keep it a secret, what you're capable of. Let's move on to Katie Cassidy, who played Laurel Lance. Comic book fans immediately recognize that name, although Dinah Lance would be the Black Canary that most people are familiar with. In fact, Laurel Lance in the comics is the daughter of Dinah Lance, who was the original Black Canary. So it's kind of interesting that they would go with Laurel Lance instead of going straight to Dinah Lance. But that's what they did. And it made a little bit more sense when later they would introduce her father, which I'll go ahead and say Quentin Lance, played by Paul Blackthorne, which was Larry Lance in the comics. And then at the New 52, which was happening the same time this show was premiering, they renamed him Kurt Lance. So I don't know why they went with Quentin for this show. It was all over the place.
Just got to be different.
But yeah, but that character in the comics is the husband of the original Black Canary, and this is Laurel Lance would then be his daughter in the comics. So that made a little bit more sense, but yeah, it was what it was. But of course, we get introduced to Kate Cassidy, who is the lawyer who, if you're a comic book fan, would know eventually she would probably become Black Canary. So what did you think of that character, kind of the scorned lover in this?
Yeah, I thought she did a very good job. I really like the scene where she gets to see Oliver Queen again. I thought she did that, did a really good job being like, I'm not really happy to see you. That scene was really well. You kind of get mixed emotions of, am I supposed to like this character or not? So I think she plays the character very well.
Yeah, I agree. I think I liked her in the show, and I liked her in, like, going back and watching the episode again. She shows strength, which if you knew that's what the character she was going to become, leans into it pretty early. And I like you, Justin. I like her interactions with Oliver were strong, where she's. But I did see, I was like, okay, I think there's still some feelings there. They're going to explore that, I'm sure. But she's. I know we're not into favorite lines, but. One of the ones that I liked when she told him, she was like, well, you have changed since you went to the island, because now at least you tell the truth, because he told her right out, don't, you don't want to be around me. I haven't changed. I'm just going to hurt you again, trying to really try to keep her safe, knowing what he's about to fully become. So yeah, I thought she was good.
So I didn't ask this. This is always a thing with me with superheroes. Is you cast relatively unknowns. Mm-hmm. So were either of you familiar with, let's say, either Stephen Amell or Katie Cassidy prior to Arrow?
No, of course, seeing the name Katie Cassidy, I wondered if she was related to David Cassidy, which I found out she was, but I didn't know anything about Stephen Amell.
Yeah, but I didn't know either of them.
Yeah, I didn't know. I didn't know Stephen Amell. I had seen Katie Cassidy in a few things. Of course, she didn't immediately become recognizable, but then I would later go, oh, wait, she was in When a Stranger Calls, and she was in the Nightmare on Elm Street remake, and she was in Click with Adam Sandler.
Okay.
There was stuff where I eventually went back and said, oh, yeah, I had seen her prior.
Right.
Stephen Amell, I can't say I did. Even when you look back at his filmography, it was okay, he was in stuff, but I probably did not ever see any of the stuff he was in. Mm-hmm. Whereas Katie Cassidy, I went back and I went, oh yeah, I definitely saw her in this, that, or another. Some people might actually remember from Gossip Girl, because she was still kind of in Gossip Girl as this show started. So there was kind of an overlap a little bit. She was in several episodes of Gossip Girl, but yeah. Moving on, we are going to jump into David Ramsey, who played John Diggle, character created for this show. Of course, as mentioned in my comic book connection, he was named after Andy Diggle, who wrote the Green Arrow Year One, but created for the show. But much like in Smallville, the character of Chloe was created for the series and became so popular, they eventually introduced her into the comic books. They did the same thing with John Diggle.
Yeah.
John Diggle now actually exists in the DC universe in the comics. Mm-hmm. So, well, of course, we just get a hint of Diggle in this.
Right.
But what do you think about this introduction as to essentially who would become the sidekick?
Right.
For Arrow as the series would go along.
I mean, who thought a Green Beret would get beat up by a guy who was stranded on an island for 5 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he did a very good job playing the character, but it's just, if you're watching just the first episode, you're very intrigued as to seeing what they're going to do with his character.
Yeah, I mean, trying to just stay with this, I will say Diggle became me and my wife's favorite character almost in the show. As the show went on, he became one of our favorites. But even in this one, I'm trying to remember, after he knocks him out, he doesn't show back up in the rest of the movie. So, the rest of the episode. So it was almost like you almost wonder if he was a throwaway character at first because, he gets out of he escapes the car, then Diggle gets him in the car and says, "Wear your seatbelt," and then when he's about to go, he's trying to take him to the party, and then
he was trying to leave the party.
Yeah, and then he knocks him out. You don't see him again. So without going without going into the next couple episodes, you almost wonder if he even comes back. Like he's just the one guy they hired to keep him in line that Oliver takes out and moves on to they have a new guy next week. So
yeah, I don't know if it's me going back now. Obviously having watched the whole series and now going back to the first episode, I don't know if it's because I know who Diggle would become, but I do think that when he is introduced, like if it's just the presence of David Ramsey or what it is, like he's going to be a major character.
Right. He definitely has that aura about him.
Yeah. Now, again, like Tim's saying, whether or not that was intentional, or if it was meant to just be a, one and done type thing, I don't know. I didn't really look into that, but yeah, I think right off, and I think it made for a good foil for Oliver. It's going to be like, how does he get away from Diggle? Although once he chokes Diggle out,
right.
You do start thinking, well, there's no way he hides that.
Right.
Clearly, when Diggle wakes back up, he knows who did that to him. It's not like it was a surprise. Moving on, we got Willa Holland as Thea Queen. This character does not exist really in the comics. He does call her Speedy, which for comic book fans would go, okay, well that's the Robin to his Batman. Although Speedy, the original Speedy, is a guy by the name of Roy Harper. That's not this name. Although the second Speedy in the comics is a girl named Mia Dearden, so whether or not Thea is supposed to be loosely inspired by Mia Dearden, I don't know. But then they have the fact that we do see Thea does use drugs, which could then tie you back into, is it Roy Harper? Because there is the famous, as Justin has talked about, the famous story in which they find out that Speedy is addicted to drugs and having to deal with all of that. So yeah, when he called, now again, I know y'all already know the series, but do you see her as possibly being his, sidekick when they introduce her in this episode?
I didn't.
Yeah, I don't either, to be honest.
Yeah, as soon as he called her Speedy, it was kind of like a gasp moment the first time I watched it. I was like, really? That's what y'all are doing? She's Speedy?
Yeah, because it does make you question, like, exactly how does she become trained the way he's been trained? Because it took him 5 years. Like,
right.
How exactly are we going to do all of that at this time and all that? Going back to my question from earlier, did either one of you recognize her from anything prior to?
I mean, she looks like Allison Brie, but I know she's not.
She does.
Yeah.
She does.
I didn't realize that you said it. I was like, yeah, that does make sense. So
she does. Yeah. I do know she was also on Gossip Girl, so I kind of find that funny that you got two actors here that both had appeared on Gossip Girl roughly around the same time as this show's getting started. And then we have we have Colin Donnell, as Tommy Merlin, who is kind of from the comics. So this is an interesting story. So Tommy Merlin did not exist in the comic books until the month before this show aired.
Okay.
He debuted in the DC Comics as the New 52 kicked off in 2012, and his first issue was a September of 2012 release. So, which was, like I said, just a month before this show aired. So I guess that was kind of some of that, DC working with Greg Berlanti and They decided to work together and said, hey, we're going to introduce this character into the comics. He, in the comic, is the son of the Dark Archer, who they would later introduce in the show. And he would be in the comics. He would be a friend of Oliver Queen's. So again, really kind of introducing him at the same time and getting these characters parallel to each other. And so we have Smallville, in which Clark Kent befriends Lex Luthor, and essentially they become really close friends for the majority of that series and of course we know right off the bat, he's the villain. Mm-hmm. Did Tommy give off the impression that he potentially would be the villain of this show? Not saying that he actually does become the villain of this show, but when they introduce, the best friend, does that now become a trope of, oh, you're going to turn and become the villain?
I mean, I didn't think so. I thought he was just going to be, regular comedic relief for the whole show.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to go back and remember, because I didn't like him, but I think I still really like the character because, like I said, he's a little over the top for me. But then when he has the conversation with Laurel where you find out that they've been dating or seeing each other and Oliver doesn't know, then I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe he will be somewhat of an antagonist, or he's, not as good of a friend as Oliver thinks he is. But I don't know if I had that same thought, back then.
Okay. Yeah, just curious. Of course, I remember when I originally watched it, as soon as they introduced him as Tommy Merlin, I wasn't familiar with him in the comics because he had just been introduced in the comics. But I did know the name Merlin. And, of course, his father would be Malcolm Merlin, who, like I said, is called the Dark Archer. And so I immediately, and I guess it was just because of my comic book knowledge, as soon as they said the name Merlin, I was like, he's going to be the villain. So, all right, well, before we start getting into more that might spoil this episode for people who've never seen it, because there is a little bit of a twist towards the end. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about, should someone who hasn't seen Arrow, is this how I'm going to reword it for this. Mm-hmm. Is this a good starting off point for Arrow? Is it a good watch? Or should they read the comics before they get into Arrow?
I would say, just based on what we've just covered, was, once again, I didn't read the comics, but because of the differences that are pretty significant, maybe not that significant, but there are changes. Maybe not read the comic first, because then I think the show may disappoint in some aspects. But it's hard for me because I didn't read the comics. But I think the show stands on its own pretty well. I don't think you need any backstory or any prior knowledge to who Arrow is or his nemesis or anything like that to be able to appreciate the show for what it is, at least in the first season, in the first episode.
Yeah, I would say, show first, comics later, because I would say my concern would be, I know Green Arrow has his own run of comics, but I would be concerned of getting all tangled up in Justice League stuff and team-ups and, am I going to go down a rabbit hole with the comics? Whereas the show, I know, is just focused on him.
Yeah, that's always, I came up with this question to ask, but that it always is a tough thing when you are talking about, decades worth of comic history. Mm-hmm. But yes, I do think that reading the comic allows you to pick up on some stuff. Like I mentioned, recognizing the name Merlin, possibly even knowing what the Deathstroke mask is that you see at the beginning. People who aren't comic book fans have no clue what that mask is.
Yeah, when I saw it, like watching it today, when I saw it, I was like, oh, was that? I totally would have overlooked that the first time, but now, having watched the show, I was like, I recognize that reference.
Yeah. Or even, when he calls Thea Speedy, like how many people picked up on what that meant? Mm-hmm. So part of me says it's good to read so that you do pick up on that. But then I stop and think, yeah, but someone who doesn't know anything, I think it's kind of a fun journey.
Yeah.
And I think to then later discover what those things mean, which then makes it fun for, like, we talked about shows like Lost and whatnot, makes it fun for a rewatch, where you do go back and go, oh, look, there was that. That was the call. This later, would reference this. And oh, hey, that's not the same girl that played Sarah Lance later in the series. So yeah, I think definitely watch it. As it again, I think this episode does a good job at starting off a story.
Yeah.
Doesn't reveal an awful lot. It isn't an origin story. We kick things off very, high pace right off the bat. And so yeah, I definitely say watch it. Go see this, and maybe it'll get you into the rest of the series.
Now it's time for a commercial.
Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and listen to an 80s Flick Flashback podcast once in a while, you could miss it. Do you love movies of a certain age? Do you miss the days of VHS tapes, VCRs, and the video rental stores? Does the thought of another 80s movie being remade seem inconceivable? My name is Tim Williams. I'm the creator and host of the 80s Flick Flashback podcast. On each episode, I'm joined by guest co-hosts to discuss one of the many movies released in the 1980s. We share our first-time watch memories, our favorite scenes, and even learn some behind-the-scenes stories about the cast and crew along the way. New episodes are released every other Friday on your favorite podcasting platform. So make like a tree, get out of here, and go listen to an excellent episode of the 80s Flick Flashback podcast. The ad is over. Go home. Go.
All right, let's get into the spinner rack, kind of get a little more spoilerish when it comes to talking about this episode and maybe the series as a whole. And we always start things off with our favorite speech bubble, a quote that we liked from the series. I'm just going to go ahead and say "You have failed this city" is the the no. Like, come on, anybody would pick that one. That's like saying "with great power comes great responsibility" for a Spider-Man episode. You have failed this city. That's the tagline. That's his mantra. So we had to go with something else. So Justin, what have you got as your speech bubble?
So since you took my serious one, I'm going to go with comedic relief. I know Tim wasn't a fan of old Tommy Merlin, but I do like good comedic relief. And with a dark, gritty show, he kind of counterbalances that. So his quote about the when Oliver shows his sister is like, "Oh, I got this rock so I can connect with you, so I can bring it to you." And he goes, "A rock? That is sweet. I want one of those shirts that says, 'My friend was a castaway, and all I got was this crappy t-shirt.'" And so it just made me think of, souvenirs and just the silly things we buy for people when we go. I'm sure y'all remember, "Oh, I went on a trip and I bought my family souvenirs."
Yeah,
that was a good one.
Well, that's just like when he's telling Thea, he was like, "Hey, I got you something," and she's like, "You've been on an island. Like, how?
Right.
How are you thinking about getting me something?" So, all right. What about you, Tim?
So I'll start with a Tommy Merlin quote that I actually liked, that I did laugh at. I mean, like I said, he's a little over the top, but I did like the scene where, I forgot exactly where they are, but Oliver says he wants to see, Laura Lance. He wants to find Laura.
Yeah.
And Tommy says, "Everyone is happy you're alive, and you want to see the one person who isn't." Like,
yeah.
Which I thought was a good line. It was a good line
one
there. But I do like the other line is, and it's I'm not necessarily it's the line, but what it's that what I could talk about before, the mystery that it's setting up when him and his dad are on the raft, and he's saying, "You've got to survive." There, I didn't build the city. I destroyed it, and I'm not the only one going right my wrong. So automatically, it's kind of giving him somewhat of a purpose. That's why when he gets home, he finds the book and he's going through the names or whatever. But I remember that was one thing I remember watching the movie. I'm like, oh, well, And once again, it's Batman. My father was killed, and I'm gonna avenge my father. But no, he finds out his father wasn't as great as he thought he was, and there were other people that were involved in that. So that's where the avenging comes in. So I thought that was a good, way to get this to get us locked into that story, that plot.
Yeah. No, I do like how this episode really does a lot and sets up like, okay, here are things you're going to need to figure out as the show goes along. I think also my quote, it wasn't so much the quote, but it was the meaning behind the quote, just like Tim was talking about, is when Oliver says, after 5 years, everything that was once familiar is now unrecognizable. The face I see in the mirror is a stranger.
Yeah, that was a good line.
And I like that because, again, that shows that duality of, a character like this, like a Batman. I did like that. And so that's why I went with that. All right, let's talk about our favorite moving panel, a scene that we felt very comic book-ish, or just a scene we liked in general. So Tim, I'll let you take over to this one first. What was a moment out of this first episode that you liked?
There were a few. I mean, one thing that it grabbed me immediately, the opening sequence of him seeing the boat, not really knowing, kind of, I guess you kind of know who it is, but like, oh, what's this? A great way to start the episode with him running and then him finding the arrow he shoots into the sticks that light the fire for him to be rescued. And of course, you got a little voiceover going over it, but I thought the action scenes were really well done. Like you said, we mentioned earlier that Stephen Amell wanted to do his own stunts, and I think you can kind of see that in some of the fight sequences. So, especially the scene of him taking care of the guys in the who was the guy he tracked? He was it Hunt?
The Hunt, yeah.
Yeah. So
Adam Hunt.
Yeah, Adam Hunt. Yeah. So
Yep.
so that I like that whole action sequence. That was really good. So I like that. Action is what kind of drew me into it, and the story got me as the episode went on. But the action was done really well, so that was good for me.
I would say I probably have two. My kind of comic booky scene for me was the chase with the guys in the masks after he got abducted.
Right.
And then really a scene that really just spoke to me was when he's at home and the storm's coming in and the camera pans through his bedroom and he's not sleeping in the bed, he's sleeping in the floor. You hear stories of like soldiers who've been out on the front lines, and they come home and they can't sleep in their bed because it's too soft. It's they're used to the ground. So it really showed he had been out there for 5 years roughing it.
Yeah. No, I always love when they do stuff like that to just bring in that what at least appears to us viewers who don't know any better, that believability.
Right.
I'm not going to say I speak for people who've experienced things like that, but it does, at least from a viewer aspect, it makes me, like you said, it makes me believe that he has actually gone through something. And those little flash moments that he had, that would be kind of a catalyst for the flashbacks that they talked about wanting to use in the series. I agree with that. I'm with Tim as well. Like, a lot of the action scenes were just great. Very reminiscent of, the Dark Knight trilogy that was going on at this time. But also, I liked, just kind of in a comic book manner, I liked him just throwing the tennis balls.
Yes,
and then,
that was good.
And then shooting each tennis ball to the wall, not missing a single one. But also going to when he's kidnapped, and I find it funny that this is another thing that was roughly at the same time. The Avengers movie also came out in 2012. And you get that interrogation scene with Black Widow. And so then you have this one where Oliver's sitting there and they're like, well, you got your hands tied behind your back. He goes, no, I don't.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that was good.
They don't need to bother showing that he got loose or free or how he did it. He just brings his hands out and goes, no, they're not. So, which I think also adds to that mystery. Like, what exactly does this guy know how to do?
Exactly. Yeah.
And what exactly are his abilities? So I think that's great. I will say, however, that a lot of that leads into my weird science.
Yeah.
So I get that this is just the first episode, so I'm willing to let go a lot of the how does he do some of the stuff he does when he's doesn't have any superpowers or anything like that. So I'm willing to get all of that. But my first thing is something that even superpower, no superpower, I don't care. How does he set up that hideout so quickly? And I get they show him, sneaking on with the book bag that first time, but he has to get equipment in there.
Yeah, yeah.
How does he do all of that with no one seeing him?
Or making all that noise.
Yes.
In what seems like a day, too.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So quickly. Like, it doesn't seem like a lot of time because it goes from him returning, and then the big climax at the end is the party for him returning. So clearly there hasn't been a lot of time that has passed, but yet he has already set up this hideout, this, arrow cave, if you will. But yeah, how did he do that? Like, how did he get that equipment? Are we to assume that some of it was already there because it was a factory, and so he is just repurposing some of that stuff? I don't know. But my other thing is about his costume. And people talk a lot about this with superheroes, but I think this one really has to play a factor. He just puts some green paint across his eyes. And he looks people square in the face. And I get they do right off the bat, like those guys that kidnaps him, he has to kill them because he says, I don't want people to know my secret.
Right.
And he straight up murders them, which was a shocker. But then he doesn't kill Adam Hunt.
Right.
And Adam Hunt has seen him in the light of the office. He's been face to face with him. He's heard him talk. How does he not know that this is Oliver Queen when Oliver Queen is clearly faces all over TV?
Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah.
Because he's the returned, the rich kid that's been straight out missing for 5 years. Like, how does he think this costume is actually going to work?
Superman can get away with it with glasses.
Yeah, but there's something more to it, though. Like, the whole idea behind Clark Kent is that Clark Kent is someone people don't notice. That's not the case here. Oliver Queen is a recognizable face. And here you are as the Hood, Green Arrow, whatever you want to call yourself. Here you are. Nothing is hidden about your face.
Just eyeliner all over your face.
Yeah, green, little green makeup going across it. Like, it's not even a mask. So, yeah, how does he think that no one is going to recognize him? I guess with that, this leads to another question. And we've kind of talked about this a little bit already. Is this too Batman? Like, does it separate itself enough? Or do you think someone would watch this episode and just immediately go, this is just a Batman ripoff, and not give it a second look?
That was my initial thought when I watched it the first time. I was like, it was too much like that. Like I said, that first half was too much Batman. It was like, like creating the lair. I was like, and like I said, because Batman Begins had only been, a year, 2 years before that, because this was the same year as Dark Knight. So it was still very fresh in my mind. Even in that story, Bruce has been away and then comes home and has to kind of, he kind of comes home and people realize, him coming back into society or whatever. So yeah, it was too Batman for me. But like I said, once I went back and started it from the beginning, giving it some time, giving it a year, I got more locked into the story. But yeah, that's why I didn't get hooked immediately.
Yeah, I'll say I agree with Tim. It's very Batman Begins. Coming back, he wants to get invested in his own company. The parallels are just, they're right beside each other. But kind of once you get out of the first 10, 15, 20 minutes, it kind of gets away from Batman a little bit, to where you don't even think about it anymore, and you're kind of just focused in on him, and what is he gonna do?
Yeah. This has been a talk even in the comics, like, is Green Arrow just a Batman ripoff? And of course they're both from the same universe, so this isn't even like comparing, like we were jokingly comparing Hawkeye to Green Arrow. The Marvel version versus the DC. This is two DC characters, and so they're both wealthy, people, both wealthy men who have lost at least one of their parents in the case of Oliver, but lost a parent, has become a vigilante, has no powers, relies entirely on gadgets and tech and training.
Which it helps to have money. Once again, all that tech he puts in the abandoned factory that his father owned. I was like, well, it helps to be a billionaire if you want to be a vigilante.
Yeah. And also, they just happen to be in cities, Gotham and Starling City, that are apparently crime-ridden.
Yeah.
Couldn't happen in a rural area.
Yeah, and I know you didn't let us talk about your weird science, but I do want to bring this up because it struck out to me this time. Starling City, right? So they don't have different football teams than we do, because he tells who all won the Super Bowl the last couple of years, and then he references Lost and he references Twilight. I'm like, these are very real world comparisons you're making. I mean, even Nolan gave Gotham its own football team. So I just that jumped out at me this time watching. I was like, wait a minute,
I didn't even think about that.
He's not in New York, or to know that, but yeah.
Yeah, because DC usually does their own thing. Marvel will usually set in the real world.
Yeah. Marvel is New York and Chicago and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, but DC, like Metropolis, has their own sports teams, and Gotham has their own sports teams, and so I didn't even think about that. That's a good one. But going back to the Batman comparison, I will say this: I think that when you really break down the character, Green Arrow, so Batman. He's Batman because of trauma.
Yes.
Yeah.
He is Batman because of vengeance. He wants to right the wrong. And some people say, well, so is Green Arrow. I'm not going to disagree, but Green Arrow, I also think his is more, whereas Bruce chose to go away and learn everything that he learned to become Batman. Green Arrow's was about, he had to survive.
Right. Yeah. And get back home.
Yeah, it wasn't a journey for him in terms of a choice. Like he was just this rich kid who gets stranded on an island, and something, which of course we find out as the series progresses, but something happened to him that turns him into this vigilante. Then at the same time, yes, it is a form of vengeance, but I think at the same time, Green Arrow's kind of motivation is more that of a social injustice. Realizing that people like his father, who people thought were helping the city, were actually, as he says, failing the city. And so it's him trying to kind of right that wrong. And I think whereas with Bruce, it was one form of transformation, I think with Oliver, it's a different type of transformation.
Yeah.
One that didn't necessarily take him to a dark place necessarily, but gave him a completely different perspective on life. And so that's kind of what my thoughts are on there. It is what it is. Yeah, you can still make all the comparisons you want. I mean, some people might even look at Diggle as the Green Arrow's version of Alfred in the series.
True.
You never know. What did you think? Now let's kind of spoil the ending of this episode. What did you think about the reveal that Oliver's mom was behind the kidnapping?
Yeah, that was a big twist. I will say that was a big twist.
Yeah, definitely didn't see that coming, but you do get some kind of weird vibes from her. She reminds me of the mom in Arrested Development.
Yeah, she does. Yeah.
Okay. So kind of a reveal that, whereas some people may have thought, okay, well, Tommy's going to end up being the villain, or this, but kind of establishing, no, his mom is going to be the big villain, is essentially what they're doing in this first episode. So yeah, kind of an interesting twist there, which then makes you wonder, is his now stepdad in on it?
Mm-hmm.
Is Speedy in on it? Like, how much of the rest of the Queen family, quote unquote, is behind this? And, is there going to be something more? But I think that also works with what I just got finished talking about Arrow's, his way to fight the social injustice, the corruption that is in Starling City, and to end up realizing that his own family, which he's already found out his dad was not the greatest person that he thought,
Right.
but to now realize, how much his mom played a factor in this and all. So I think that was a great setup right for the end to hook you of, hey, you're going to want to watch the next episode.
Right.
So, all right, well, let's go ahead and make our final decisions with Bag It, Stack It, or Trade It. So, Justin, I will let you know. We're only going to talk about the first episode. So, what were your thoughts on this pilot episode of Arrow?
I'm going to go with a very high stack it. There was a lot of good moments. The action was good. Dialogue, script, I thought was pretty good. I'm not exactly sold on what's-his-face playing Green Arrow.
Stephen Amell?
Yeah, he just kind of comes across, and this is just me being, my personal opinion. He just seems to be flat and have kind of the same attitude toward everything.
Yeah.
Even, when he's smiling, it's a frown. When he's sad, it's a frown. When he's mad, it's a frown.
But again, I go into what I said earlier. Is that a performance issue, or do you think that is actually character development?
I think that's his character, but to me, it just rubs me the wrong way. There were just some spots where, I kind of got a little bored and, wasn't paying much attention. But I think it's just me being nitpicky, I think, really.
I'm going to bag this one. And like I said, I was a big fan of Arrow, the series. I went with the spinoffs of The Flash and Supergirl. Not so much The Legends of Tomorrow, but I did give it a chance. But it's a great first episode. Like I said, like we talked about, like with not really knowing much about the character, it did hook me in eventually. Once I went back and kind of started again from the beginning. But yeah, so I would bag this one.
Yeah, so it's funny you bring up what would become the Arrowverse. I actually think if you compare this episode to what everything would become, this is going to get a lower rating for me.
Okay.
Because there was nothing about this show that would indicate it was going to be the comic book juggernaut that it would become.
Yeah.
But if you take this episode as is, as if you know nothing about what it's going to come, I actually do bag it. Because I do think this is a fresh take on a character. I think that even though it did have its comparisons with the Dark Knight trilogy, it was what people were interested in at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it fit that perfectly. I mean, you can make the comparison with Batman, and sure, okay, so then look at it as this was the best way we could bring Batman to TV.
Mm-hmm.
Since we couldn't bring Batman to TV. I mean, that was always the thing in Smallville, is that you couldn't have... The only big character they could have was Clark Kent, aka Superman. They couldn't have any other of the big characters. You couldn't have Batman. You couldn't have Wonder Woman. They were only alluded to within the show.
Mm-hmm.
So we knew they existed, but we could never have them as part of the show. And so, yes, it does have those tie-ins, but I think that that's what worked. And I think that this was a good setup for a series, so that hey, there's a lot of things that you've got to discover about this character by watching the series. And then there's a lot of things that are going to be unraveled, like we just talked about with the reveal of his mom, Moira, finding out that she's potentially the villain. And so I think for all of those reasons, it was absolutely a bag it for me. So now let's get into our recommendations. So what is something that we felt would be something that would go along with this, as we all thought about this episode favorably? So what's something go along? I'll speak on this first because I've already talked about it, and that is going and reading Green Arrow Year One by Diggle and Jock. It is a great read. You can definitely see the inspiration that had. The look of even the costume, very similar in year one. And it's a great modern reinterpretation of this classic character from the Silver Age of comics, and just giving him more of a modern twist, giving more of a grounded origin. And so I definitely want to go with Green Arrow year one. Go out and read that and enjoy. So Tim, what about you? What's your recommendation?
We've talked about it already. I'm gonna take an easy route here, not think too hard. I would actually pair this with Lost. I think once again another great show that we've kind of tied in with the flashbacks and the mystery of it. Because I think if you were a fan of Lost, you would be a fan of this show, and if maybe you are a fan of the show and never watched Lost, be one of the few people out there. At least the first couple of seasons of Lost. Maybe you may not like the ending as much as.
Well, I mean, Tommy does spoil the ending of the series in this episode.
You just skip that part. But yeah. So I would recommend Lost as a good companion with this, a non-comic companion.
And how do you know Tommy's telling the truth?
Right.
Anyways,
right.
I don't know how much I've talked to y'all about. I was a big Lost guy, and I delved deep into Lost, and I did not dislike the finale like some people did.
I didn't dislike the finale either.
I do think a lot of people misinterpreted the finale.
Yes.
So, but we're not going to get into that right now.
We'll say that for another episode.
Well, let's see if you dislike my recommendations.
All right.
So I actually have two.
You recommend Gilligan's Island. That's what I'm gonna.
Well, that would be a good one. So something I kind of thought of is I always kind of seen Green Arrow as kind of like a B-list DC character. I would pair this with Jessica Jones. Dark, gritty, a little bit of, a lot of suspense, what's going to happen, a character trying to find themselves, interesting villains and all that. And then the one that's really going to get you is Riverdale.
Okay.
So, another dark show, a lot of interesting characters. You don't know who's good, who's bad, and there's family members that you can't trust.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I haven't watched enough Riverdale to probably follow you on that.
Me either.
Yeah, started season 1. I don't think I ever finished season 1, and then I never watched another episode after that.
Just watch season 1. That's all you need to watch.
Yeah.
Gets a little weird.
At some point,
I found out
I found out they did a musical episode. So at some point, I got to go see that musical episode.
They drank too many milkshakes at the diner.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So going into that, if you're not a fan of comic books, you go into Smallville, a show like Smallville, and you don't know that Smallville is the name of the city that Clark Kent grew up in. You're going in and you all of a sudden go, oh, wait, this is a Superman show. Arrow, of course, a little bit more on the nose as to what you're going in to watch. But yeah, Riverdale, same thing. It's like you go into Riverdale thinking, oh, this is going to be a gritty little teen drama. And then all of a sudden you realize, this is Archie, Veronica, Betty, Jughead. Like these are, I know these from when I was a kid. They were on my bubble gum when I was growing up. Like, yeah, I don't know. We'll cover it at some point on this show, but yeah, wow, tying that into the recommendation. Hey, there you go. Also a CW show, so it is does have its connections.
Just like those commercials.
Yeah. All right, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. So next week, we are going to bring back in our dapper Southern gent, Blake, and all four of us are going to discuss these two pilot episodes of two shows that really put a staple on DC on television. And we're going to determine which one actually was the better kickoff to the world that they would create. But this episode about the Arrow pilot has come to an end. So don't forget to subscribe, to this show. Rate and review it. Tell us what you think. Join us for that. And also go out and keep up with Tim with the 80s Flick Flashback. Thank you both gentlemen for joining me on this talk with Arrow. And look forward to seeing what our discussion comes up next week when we determine which one of these we battle it out at the end of our March Madness as to which one comes out the champ.
Gonna be fun.
Yep. Looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening. For today, for Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells. and I'll see you on the other side of the page.
Divide. From print to screen, the legends stand. Comic games with the upper hand.